book of Daniel. Daniel was the author. Now we're going to look at a couple things in a moment. There's been a lot of critics, higher critics, and liberals like to attack it, but I believe Daniel was the author. And Mama's here, so she got the meaning of all the names in the Bible. So what's Daniel mean? That's it. Yep, that's exactly right. I heard God is my judge, but that's it. Daniel was born in Jerusalem, evidently in the royal family during the time of the Reformation of Josiah. So probably a very exciting time to be born. I come to think of how bad Israel or Judah was, and in the early ministry of Jeremiah, and then ended up a 70-year period serving 6 Babylonian kings and 2 Persian rulers. So he saw a lot of guys come and go, and he stayed faithful. Daniel's authorship of this book has been attacked for a long time, and I think there's lots of reasons within the Word of God to show that Daniel wrote it. Look at verse chapter 1 and verse 5. Yeah, let's go to chapter 1, verse 5. And there's other verses too, but let's look at that. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and a vine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, then at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now, understand captives being fed is not a big deal, but the specific amount of time, someone would have to have a little bit of knowledge to know that's a pretty small amount of time in reality of history, 3 years. So there's a lot of manners and customs and history that's given to us, and the religions that existed in this book, coming from someone I believe who was there at that time. The author knows about it in the 6th century. Some of these people are saying it was written like centuries later, so they would not be intimately aware of what's going on as Daniel was. Look over at Matthew chapter 24. This is a little cross reference for us into the New Testament, which is always good for us to see. Matthew chapter 24 and verse number 15. If I could just find Matthew, I'd be good. Matthew chapter 24 and 16, or say 15, sorry. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel, the prophet, stand in the holy place, whosoever readeth him understand. So the idea, and that's referenced back to chapter 9 of Daniel. So some evidence within. And then traditionally, Jewish and Christian scholars traditionally have acknowledged Daniel's author. I believe absolutely he's the author of this book. So let's go back to Daniel chapter number 4. We see the theme here through Daniel is that God is all sovereign. He is all sovereign. There's no doubt about that. Chapter 4 and verse number 25. That they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beast. Did I get the right verse here? Okay, yes, at the bottom. And the dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of the heaven. And 7 times shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth to whomsoever he will. So God is above all. He is ruler. And this was Nebuchadnezzar, who had to live like an animal for a few years. So interesting story there. We won't even touch on that this evening, but interesting one. And then the 70 weeks of Daniel speak of the sovereignty of God as well. In chapter 9, that's a whole different study as well, but it's there in chapter 9 for us to look at. If you get the time, it's quite a study. The book of Daniel was written to the Jews in a time of captivity. Daniel was taken from Jerusalem before its fall, and he prophesied through the time of Nebuchadnezzar, the main king that he served in Babylon, and then Darius the Persian and Cyrus the Persian. Covers 70 full years. Look over in chapter 9, verse 2. In the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, stood by the books that number of the years, whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolation of Jerusalem. So it was a 70-year span of Daniel in Babylon. The religious setting, so they're no longer in Judah, and there's no emphasis in Babylon to serve the one and true living God. So it's a little bit different scenario here. The religion of the Babylonians was centered on the worship of Bel Marduk, almost like the dog Marduk, cartoon guy. But at any rate, the name's close. And that was their chief god. And now there was other gods as well, but he kind of took the top dog, as you want to say, of the chief of gods for them. But they did worship other ones, and we'll see that in a little bit. And the purpose of the book of Daniel, again, is to declare the sovereignty of God over all nations, saying that God is in control, and it's demonstrated through Daniel and his friends to the Babylonian rulers and then the Persian monarchs as well. The writing of the book is, they think, it's around 535 BC. Let's go back to chapter 1, and we'll look at a couple of verses here now. Chapter 1, verse number 1, it says, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it." This is the year that Daniel was deported, and then the 3 years of training begins. And that was in 606 BC. Then over in chapter 2, and verse number 1, "And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him." So this is when Nebuchadnezzar has the dream. His sorcerers and wise men can't figure out the dream. Daniel interprets the dream, and then he's elevated to positions of great authority within the kingdom. That was around 603 BC. And then over in chapter 5, now understand, I did not bring out every book that was ever written about this. I'm using other scholars, okay? I don't have the research to go check everything out. I'm relying on some who might be off a little bit, but this is around about times. Chapter 5, verse 17. "Daniel answered and said before the king, Let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation." This is Daniel interpreting the handwriting on the wall to Belshazzar. This was the last night that Belshazzar was king of Babylon. The Medo-Persian Empire took over that night, and this was 539 BC. We can be confident on that. Lots of history written about it. And then chapter 6 and verse number 1. "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which should be over the whole kingdom, over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first." Now we know this is the beginning of the story of Daniel in Lion's Den. The other Medo-Persians probably didn't like that this Jewish captive was getting their honor, their glory spot, and so they're upset. But that was around 538 BC, and this is at the beginning of Darius' rule. And then over in chapter 9, we already read a verse there. He begins with the vision of 70 weeks of Israel, and then chapters 10, 11, and 12 are visions of Persia, Greeks, and end times. And they think that was around 536. So shortly thereafter, the whole book will be compiled, and so that's why we get the area 535 BC. You can't really look at the book of Daniel without having a little glimpse at the character of Daniel, who he actually was. And he was a man of much integrity, intriguing, no doubt. So we'll have a little look at that now. Back to chapter 1, we see a little bit about Daniel and his character. It says he was taken as children. Verse number 4, it talks about children being taken to Babylon from Jerusalem. Now, some scholars say that he suggests he was 16. I couldn't find a verse for that, but very well could have been. I don't think it's far off to think he was a young teenager at any rate. And I don't know if anybody else has read anything contrary to that, but I think that that's within parameters. Verse number 4, "Children whom was no blemish, but well favored and skillful in all wisdom and cunning in knowledge, understanding science, such had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach and learn, and the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans." That's quite a list. Pretty remarkable young fellow. I think he has great character, but he has great ability to learn as well. I shudder to think of learning another speech, another language, another mother tongue. It would be very difficult for me. And then keep it on in this. "And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, of the wine which he drank, so nourished them 3 years, and that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs did give names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. So we see that they were going to be given 3 years of schooling by the Babylonians' top scholars and teachers. We know that his name was changed from Daniel to Belshazzar. Now, that's about the only time we really see it in Daniel. The rest of the time he's just referred to as Daniel. So the name didn't stick so well. Not like his 3 comrades. We don't hear so much their Jewish names. We hear more of their Babylonian names. But if you read through the book of Daniel, you don't find anywhere, I should maybe the whole scriptures, I didn't check the whole scripture, but nothing written negative about him. His great character, we know a little later on, he stands before the eunuch and said, no, we won't eat of the king's meat because it's not proper. We'll eat something different. And let's be honest, he didn't have any parents to help make that decision. He didn't have any high priest or Levites to help make that decision. It was conviction in his own heart, and indicates great character there at 16, whatever, still pretty young, very being easy to be influenced at that age. We look at college students who go away and they're 20, 21, and they're very influenceable. The influence of the college, the professors can change their mind about things. So at 16, he's pretty easy to be influenced, but he stood for right. And he's known as the great beloved in chapter 9, no fault, no occasion of reproof. In chapter 6, where the Persians were looking for a reason to do away with Daniel, they couldn't find any. That's a pretty amazing testimony when you think about it. God wasn't looking for faults. These were man. And let's face it, men could set you up pretty quick. And they did set up Daniel, but they couldn't find anything wrong with him. That's a pretty amazing testimony, one that we should strive to have as well. Daniel, I remember being in Bible college, and we had to take a course called Daniel and Revelation. We call it Dan and the Rev. That's what we used to call it in Bible college. But it's because Daniel and Revelation do form together because of speaking of end-time events, things that were and will be and shall be in the future. It's an interesting, not that this is going to help you a great deal as you read through Daniel, but it's an interesting format the book was originally written in. Chapter 1 was in Hebrew. An introduction to Daniel's personal history. We really get that in chapter 1. And then chapters 2 to 7 was written in Aramaic, which was the future Gentile powers. That's the language they would use a lot of. And then through 8 to 12 is back to Hebrew, as Daniel surveys the future of the Jews under the Gentile rule. So it's an interesting little breakdown how the book was written. It's not written like that in your Bible, but that's how it was originally written. And then the ultimate deliverance that comes through Jesus Christ. Look over chapter 2. We get a really interesting, this is the vision that Nebuchadnezzar has. We won't read the whole chapter. But 32 of chapter 2 says, this image head was of the fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and the thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Now, does anyone know, this is a little bit early quizzing, I know, but does anyone know what that head of gold, what nation that represented? I know you're searching your data banks.
Nebuchadnezzar's.
Babylonian, that's right. So then the breast and the arms of silver. Anyone know? Is that half?
I'm not sure if it was the Alexander's Empire. I'm not sure.
But he's coming, but that's not the next one. The next one would be the Medo-Persians. And then Greece, which is the belly and the thighs of brass. And then the legs of iron. Anyone know what that one was? It's a real famous empire. Rome. 3, you're out, so you can't answer any more now. I'm kidding. Rome, that's right. And then there is a revised Roman Empire, the iron and the clay. Let me see. It's a little interesting. We see in this verse, just look over in verse number 43. And whereas thou sawest iron mingled with iron mixed and marred clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. I think there's a little suggestion or telling us that there's a dynamic influence in that empire, which would make sense. That's the last one. That's the one that Antichrist will rule. And so just showing a little influence there. The vision was all future except for Babylonian. And And some of this we haven't even seen yet, right? We know the Roman Empire is done, but the revised one is still yet to come. And then there's another kingdom coming, and that's the best one. Verse number 45, in those days, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all thy kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. That's a kingdom made with not made with man's hands. This is the kingdom of our Messiah, the promised Messiah. And you see reference to that in Isaiah chapter 9 and in Matthew chapter 21. There hasn't been no other world power since the fall of Rome. We know that there's been superpowers and regional powers, but no world power. And then we know that the revised Roman Empire that's to come, it will be a worldwide one, and it will be seeking to destroy all things related to Christ and Christians as well. And so these images were future images or visions that Daniel was having, and laying it out there for us and telling us what's going to happen with the empires of the day. It's a perfect message as well. Christ is represented throughout the book of Daniel, and we're in chapter 2 already, and verse number, where is it, 34? Let me see if I got that written down right. Yes, 34. Thou sawest till a stone was cut out without hands. The great stone was cut out, and the stone representing the Lord. Chapter 7, verse 3, the Son of Man is represented, and then the certain man, Daniel chapter 10. And we see that the stone brings the victory, right? He destroys the image, and away it goes. And in chapter 9 of Daniel, I think we actually had 3 or 4 days of study on the 70 weeks of Daniel in Bible college. I am not going to do that this evening, but the idea that that's the text based upon the 70 weeks, and we understand today we're between the 69th and 70th week, and what's to come is the 70th week. And again, that's a study all itself, but it's just a little, again, highlights of the book as we go along. So some questions for you to consider. Who was the first king Daniel served? And I was joking. You can still guess, Mike. You were on a roll there. I had to slow you down a little bit. Nebuchadnezzar, chapter 1, verse 1. That's who took him out. And then chapter 2, the vision. And then he was exalted to a great position in the kingdom. Who was the last king that he served?
Darius.
Sorry?
Darius.
No, it was Persian, but it wasn't Darius. Now, okay, let me rephrase that. It was the last one he served in a very significant way. Darius was, but he did serve another king.
Is it Cyrus?
Cyrus, chapter 10, verse 1. And then Mama already got the name. Daniel means God is my judge, so I can't even put it out there. All right, now this is going to be a good one. So we know Daniel's 3 friends, and we never touched on the story of Daniel's 3 friends, amazing gentlemen, young men who served the Lord as well. So Hananiah had his name changed to Shadrach, which this is not unusual for at this time period when nations took over other nations and took the cream of their crop and would change their names and try to make them assimilate into their culture, into their way of doing things. It's not unusual. So Shadrach. Does anyone know what that word Shadrach means? It's just a little trivia, really. It means the servant of Aku. And Aku was the moon god. So not as great as Bel Marduk, but he's still pretty important. Mishael. Now his Jewish name means who is like God. And my goodness, I think I wrote it down wrong. Shadrach, Meshach. What does his name mean? Anyone know? It's a little bit play on his Jewish name. Who is like Aku, the moon god again. So they took it from who is like God to who's like this God. And then Azariah, Abednego, and that name means servant of Nebo, which was another god. I don't know which one he was, but he was another god that they had. So after Nebuchadnezzar, we don't see the kings. There was other kings that Daniel would have been serving under, but he did lose in the sense of a prime ministership or great authority. But what king was told by Daniel that he would be taken by the enemy that very night? Belshazzar, that's right. And it's interesting, I was just reading this today. Usually when a opposing army, now the Persians were somewhat more moderate than the Babylonians and the Syrians before them, but usually when an invading army would take the capital city, they would just kill all the rulers. I mean, why keep any of them around? That's only trouble. But that didn't happen to Daniel. For some reason, God protected him, and we do know what reason that was for, because that night he was given the robes and made in a great position of authority after he told Belshazzar what was going to happen, but Darius kept him alive. That was an interesting little thought I saw there today, and you find that in chapter 5. What Persian king decreed that the people should fear and tremble at for the God of Daniel? Darius. That's correct. I knew that he had said some things, but as I read it today, I just want to read these verses because they're interesting. Coming from a heathen point of view, if you want to say it. Then King Darius wrote unto all the people, nations, and languages that dwelled in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you, and make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and rescueth and worketh signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, and hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. That's pretty amazing that he put this out through all, how many, I think it was 120, 120 provinces. He put this all out and said this is a decree. Wouldn't that be nice if someone from our government put that decree out and said, fear God? Now I know that the whole nation didn't turn to God or anything of that nature, but it is an interesting thought. Any questions or thoughts from you about Daniel? You got it all under control. That's good. It's a good book to read. I know chapters 10, 11, 12 can be, if you don't know your history a little bit, it would be good to run up on that as you read those things, but it's a great book and how God has fulfilled those things. And not all of them. Some of them are still yet to come.